In early 1943, the Atlantic Ocean was an immense field of invisible confrontation. Beneath its surface, in the dark and cold depths, one of the most intense battles of the Second World War was taking place, the Battle of the Atlantic. German submarines, known as U-boats, operated secretly and relentlessly. They attacked Allied convoys carrying vital cargo from North America to Great Britain. Every ton of fuel, every crate of ammunition, every shipment of food could determine the outcome of the war. The command of the Kriegsmarine, led by Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, had placed its hopes on the submarine fleet. By the beginning of 1943, more than 300 U-boats were in service, each armed with torpedoes capable of sinking a large vessel with a single strike. These boats departed from bases in Lorient, Brest, and Saint-Nazaire, slipped into the Atlantic, and ambushed merchant convoys. Their goal was to sever supply lines and isolate the British Isles. At that time, the Allies suffered heavy losses. During the first months of 1943, over 500 ships were destroyed. The Atlantic had become a graveyard of steel hulls slowly settling on the ocean floor. Yet with these losses came experience. Scientific laboratories and intelligence services in Britain and the United States were working tirelessly to develop technologies that could change the course of the war. The main objective was to break the German communication codes transmitted through the Enigma system. The Enigma was an electromechanical cipher machine used by the German armed forces to encrypt radio transmissions. Its settings changed daily, creating millions of possible combinations. Without the exact rotor positions and wiring configurations, reading a message was virtually impossible. The Allies had already achieved success in deciphering earlier versions of Enigma, but the naval version, which employed additional rotors, remained unbroken. American intelligence realized that to achieve a decisive breakthrough, they needed to obtain an actual machine along with its codebooks. The task seemed impossible. Every German captain had orders to destroy all classified materials and scuttle the submarine if capture was imminent. Yet, within the headquarters of the U.S. Navy, officers began to consider a daring idea. If even one U-boat could be captured intact, it might alter the entire course of the undersea war. Amid this strategic struggle, one particular submarine stood out, U-505, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Peter Jeck. It belonged to the 2nd Flotilla, based in Lorient, France. The boat had earned its combat reputation in 1942, sinking several ships in the Caribbean and off the coast of Africa. However, its luck was fading. In subsequent patrols, the crew encountered increasingly organized Allied anti-submarine defenses, strengthened by radar, sonar buoys, and long-range patrol aircraft. By the spring of 1943, the Germans were losing their advantage. Their radio messages were being intercepted more frequently, and the Allied convoy system had become more efficient. American destroyers and escort carriers now possessed improved sonar and depth charges capable of striking targets with precision. Even the very idea of invisibility, the foundation of the U-boat's power, was under threat. Meanwhile, within U.S. Navy headquarters on the East Coast, plans were being formed to intercept one of the enemy submarines. A secret group of officers, including intelligence analysts, cryptographers, and ship commanders, studied patrol routes and likely areas of enemy activity. On the maps of the Atlantic, lines and circles marked the hunting grounds of the wolf packs. Among numerous possible targets, one began to stand out: U-505. The interest in this particular submarine was sparked by a series of strange radio transmissions intercepted in late April 1943. The German signal suggested mechanical difficulties, making the submarine potentially vulnerable. The staff concluded that if an opportunity arose, this was the boat to capture. In the months that followed, U-505 continued its patrols, narrowly escaping destruction thanks to the experience of its crew. Yet the Americans did not lose sight of it. Preparations began for an operation in which the newly formed 22nd Hunter-Killer Group, centered around the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal, would play the leading role. Its mission was not simply to destroy submarines, but to capture one. The ocean was preparing to witness a new page in naval history. No one yet knew that the forthcoming action against U-505 would mark the first time since 1812 that the U.S. Navy captured an enemy vessel on the high seas. But the shadows of the Atlantic were already deepening, and the events to come would astonish the world. By mid-1943, the naval power of the United States had greatly strengthened its control over the Atlantic Ocean. New escort carriers, destroyers, and corvettes formed mobile groups capable of operating far from shore. Their main objective was to eliminate German submarines, which still posed a serious threat to Allied convoys. It was during this period that the U.S. Navy decided to form specialized hunting units known as hunter-killer groups. These combined an escort carrier with several fast destroyers equipped with advanced sonar systems and anti-submarine weapons. One of these groups became the 22nd Task Group under the command of Captain Daniel V. Gallery. It included the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and 5 destroyers: USS Pillsbury, USS Pope, USS Flaherty, USS Chatelain, and USS Jenks. The group took the name of its flagship and received a special mission to seek and, if possible, capture a German submarine intact. Captain Gallery, an experienced officer, firmly believed that the war could be won not only by destroying the enemy, but by seizing his secrets. Preparations for the operation began in the autumn of 1943. On board the Guadalcanal, crews conducted exercises simulating the detection and boarding of an enemy submarine. Sailors practiced approaching a disabled U-boat, lowering boats, and landing a boarding team. Every maneuver had to be executed without error and in the shortest possible time. The greatest challenge lay in the fact that every German crew was under strict orders to destroy all secret materials and scuttle the boat at the first sign of capture. Thus, speed and precision would decide everything. At the same time, intelligence units continued their work. Analysts monitored Kriegsmarine radio traffic, mapping possible patrol routes. Special attention was paid to the waters off the west coast of Africa, where German submarines attacked ships bound for the Suez Canal and the Eastern Front. It was in this region that the 22nd Group was ordered to operate. In December 1943, the USS Guadalcanal and its escorts departed from Norfolk. The task force moved south across the Atlantic and reached the waters near Freetown, one of the key Allied shipping lanes. There, they expected to encounter enemy submarines. Throughout the winter months, the crews maintained constant patrols, but with no success. German captains had changed their tactics. They avoided direct confrontations and maintained strict radio silence. Nevertheless, the operation continued. On the carrier's deck, Avenger torpedo bombers and Wildcat fighters stood ready for reconnaissance flights at dawn and dusk. Each day, their crews searched for traces of U-boats, fuel slicks, bubbles, faint radar contacts, or fragments of wreckage. Life aboard the ships was filled with tension. The endless sea and the waiting wore down morale, turning each day into a test of endurance. By the spring of 1944, the situation began to shift. Radio intercepts indicated that one German submarine was operating near the Canary Islands and the Gulf of Guinea. The call signs matched those previously associated with U-505. For the Americans, this was the long-awaited opportunity. Captain Gallery immediately ordered a change of course and began covert tracking. According to intelligence reports, U-505 was in poor condition. Mechanical failures, exhaustion of the crew, and a string of failed patrols had undermined its effectiveness. The German command was already considering sending it back for repairs, but Captain Jeck had been ordered to remain on station. These circumstances made the submarine an ideal target for capture. On 22 May 1944, the task group reached the designated sector. Over the following days, the destroyers conducted systematic sonar sweeps, gradually narrowing the search area. On 4 June 1944, at 11:00 inches the morning, the sonar operator aboard USS Chatelaine detected a faint contact. The signal repeated after a minute. The command confirmed a possible submarine. The order was given to all ships to assume combat positions. The sea was calm and visibility excellent. Within minutes, bubbles in a dark patch appeared on the surface, evidence of ballast tanks being blown. U-505 was surfacing. For the Americans, the decisive moment had come. They knew that if they hesitated, the Germans would have time to destroy the boat. That day, the Atlantic became the stage for one of the most remarkable naval operations of the Second World War. What happened next would be remembered as the seizure of U-505. On 4 June 1944, the Atlantic Ocean was unusually calm. South of the Canary Islands, the water lay like glass, disturbed only by a faint ripple. At 11:10 a.m., the destroyer USS Chatelaine, part of the 22nd Task Group, detected a submarine contact. A clear mark appeared on the sonar screen, a slow-moving object at a depth of about 50 meters. The destroyer's commander immediately confirmed the contact and ordered an attack. Moments later, a message was received from the flagship USS Guadalcanal. Contact confirmed. Commence action according to plan. The destroyers formed a battle line in a wide semicircle. Aboard the carrier, anti-submarine aircraft were prepared for launch, armed with depth charges and torpedoes. Everything proceeded with disciplined precision. Every sailor knew his assigned task. Within minutes, Chatelaine moved into attack position and released a pattern of depth charges. The explosions tore through the water, sending tall columns skyward. The contact briefly disappeared from the sonar screen, then reappeared several hundred meters away. The submarine was maneuvering, attempting to evade. The destroyer Flaherty joined the pursuit, attacking from another angle. The synchronized detonations created an acoustic storm that forced the submarine upward. At 11:20, Lookout spotted an expanding oil slick and streams of bubbles on the surface. A minute later, the conning tower of U-505 broke through the waves. The submarine surfaced sharply, heeling to port. Her stern was damaged, smoke rising from the vents. The destroyers closed in to firing range. Several rounds were fired along the hull, damaging the deck gun and periscopes. The goal was to compel the crew to abandon ship, not to destroy it. Captain Gallery's plan included the possibility of capture, and that moment came sooner than expected. The Germans opened the hatches and began to abandon the vessel. The demolition charges they had prepared failed to detonate, perhaps due to damage or simple haste. American observers saw men leaping into the water as the crippled submarine drifted without control. At 11:25, Gallery gave the order to cease fire. Aircraft from Guadalcanal circled overhead to secure the area and prevent interference from other U-boats. The destroyer USS Pillsbury approached U-505 and prepared to board. This was the most dangerous phase of the operation. No one knew whether the submarine was mined or whether structural damage might trigger an explosion. A small volunteer party lowered a boat and made the short crossing. Climbing onto the deck of the submarine, they found smoke still seeping from the vents. Inside, darkness reigned, heavy with the smell of fuel and burnt insulation. Flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing scattered charts, tools, and equipment. Instruments still trembled, and gauges flickered weakly. The traces of a hasty evacuation were everywhere. In a matter of minutes, the boarding party confirmed that the boat was empty and that the scuttling systems had not been activated. Among the debris, they found valuable documents, code books, navigational charts, and manuals for the Enigma machine. Most important of all was the machine itself, intact and undamaged. It was a rare prize, the latest naval Enigma, captured complete with current settings. Meanwhile, the destroyers were pulling the German sailors from the sea. Most were exhausted and disoriented, but alive. They were taken aboard Guadalcanal under heavy guard. For the Allies, rescuing them served a strategic purpose, keeping the operation secret. Germany must not discover that U-505 had been captured. By noon, the submarine began taking on water rapidly. Her damaged stern and open hatches threatened to sink her. The Pillsbury secured a tow line to prevent her from going under. For hours, the crews fought the flooding, pumping water and sealing leaks. Finally, they stabilized the situation. The next step was to tow the prize to the nearest Allied base in West Africa. What had begun as an experimental mission had turned into a historic triumph. For the first time in the war, the Americans had not merely destroyed an enemy submarine, but taken one intact. None of those present yet realized how valuable this success would prove to cryptographers and intelligence officers. U-505, conquered by the ocean and by fortune, had become a prize that would change the course of the secret war of codes. After the battle off the coast of Africa, the ocean grew calm again, as if nothing had happened. Yet in its center, under the blazing sun, the U.S. Task Group faced one of the most difficult phases of the entire operation, saving their captured prize. U-505 drifted slowly, her hull damaged, water seeping in through ruptures. Aboard the USS Pillsbury and the other ships, sailors worked tirelessly to secure the tow. Pumps were set up, leaks patched, and steel cables reinforced to keep the submarine afloat. Captain Daniel Gallery, commander of the group, understood that even the smallest mistake could erase the entire success of the mission. The boat had to be delivered to port not merely as a trophy, but as a source of valuable intelligence. The decision was made to tow it first to Dakar, then onward to the Bahamas, where repair facilities and intelligence analysts were stationed. The towing operation proved arduous. U-505's damaged rudder and stern resisted the Atlantic swells, and every mile was gained with effort. Crews stood watch around the clock, ready to cut the cable if the submarine began to founder. Several times, shifting winds and currents nearly overturned the crippled craft. On the decks of the destroyers, men worked without rest, fighting the drag of the ocean, while the escort carrier Guadalcanal maintained air cover in case of enemy interference. Meanwhile, aboard the Guadalcanal, a different kind of work had begun. Intelligence officers started their preliminary assessment of the materials found inside the submarine. Among the papers were cipher tables, weather reports, radio logs, and route charts. Of greatest importance were the key sheets and rotor settings for the Enigma machine. For the Allies, it was a discovery of immense significance for the first time. They possessed up-to-date information used by the German Navy in real operations. Recognizing the value of these materials, Gallery imposed strict secrecy. Every member of the task force signed non-disclosure agreements. In all official records and radio reports, U-505 was listed as sunk. Even the German command was informed that the boat was lost with all hands. This deception preserved the strategic advantage. The Germans continued to use their existing codes, unaware that the Allies had access to them. By mid-June 1944, the long tow reached its destination. The damaged U-505 arrived safely at the naval base in Dakar, where engineers stabilized her hull and conducted temporary repairs. Later, the submarine was transferred to Port Royal in the Bahamas. There, American engineers and intelligence specialists began a thorough examination of its structure. They studied the hydraulic systems, batteries, ballast controls, and optical instruments. Many of the German design solutions were more advanced than those used in American submarines, and several would later influence post-war naval engineering. At the same time, copies of the documents and the Enigma components were sent to Washington and to Bletchley Park in Britain. There, cryptographers immediately began analyzing the data. The new code tables clarified key parameters and dramatically accelerated the decoding of Kriegsmarine radio traffic. Within weeks, the Allies could predict U-boat movements, avoid ambushes, and strike precisely at enemy bases. It was one of the turning points that shifted the Battle of the Atlantic permanently in favor of the Allies. Meanwhile, the captured German crew remained under the strictest secrecy. They were taken to an isolated prisoner of war camp in the United States, with no contact allowed with the outside world. Their letters and correspondence were forbidden. Officially, they were all presumed dead. This isolation ensured that Germany would not suspect the truth. Gallery and his officers understood the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Their mission marked the first time since 1812 that the U.S. Navy had captured an enemy vessel at sea. Yet recognition would not come for many years. In June 1944, they continued their duties quietly, knowing that their greatest victory had to remain unseen. In the tropical sunlight of the Bahamas, U-505 lay motionless at the pier, her steel skin rusting, her compartments filled with silence. But inside her rested the story of an entire war, told not through battles or heroics, but through metal, instruments, and codes. The submarine was no longer a weapon of war. It had become a symbol, a triumph of reason over machinery, persistence over fear, and knowledge over the chaos of the ocean. By mid-1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had entered its decisive phase. The Allies were preparing for the Normandy landings, and control of the sea lanes had become a matter of survival. Every convoy carrying fuel, ammunition, and equipment had to reach Europe safely. A single leak of information about their routes could spell disaster. At this critical moment, the data recovered from U-505 began to show its full worth. In the secret code-breaking centers of Bletchley Park in Britain and Arlington in the United States, teams of analysts began systematic work on decrypting German naval communications. The specialists received the new cipher tables and instructions found aboard the captured submarine. These documents contained precise details on how the Kriegsmarine changed Enigma settings and call signs for its radio stations. With this information, the cryptographers refined the rotation algorithms of the machine's rotors and calibrated their own decoding devices, known as bombs. Before the capture of U-505, Allied intelligence could decode only a portion of German messages, often with long delays. Now, the process accelerated dramatically. Within 24 hours of interception, analysts could often read the content of enemy transmissions. This meant that Allied Naval Command could anticipate U-boat patrol routes, supply rendezvous, and even the timing of code changes. The impact was immediate. During the summer of 1944, the number of Allied shipping losses dropped sharply. Convoys traveled under the protection of escort carriers and destroyers, deliberately avoiding zones of German submarine concentration. The U-boats, in turn, began to fall into ambushes. The radio network that had once shielded them now betrayed their movements. At the same time, Allied forces were able to launch precise strikes on Kriegsmarine infrastructure. Using decoded coordinates, Allied aircraft bombed submarine bases in France and Norway. In some cases, intelligence from the Enigma material saved entire convoys, rerouting them before enemy attacks could occur. All of this unfolded without the Germans realizing their codes had been compromised. In Washington, the capture of U-505 was considered one of the greatest intelligence successes of the entire war. Every document relating to the operation was classified at the highest level. Official reports remained unpublished, and the participants' names were withheld. Even the sailors who had boarded the submarine were forbidden to speak of it to their families. The entire operation was marked top secret. While fierce fighting continued across Europe, another war, invisible and silent, was being waged in the back rooms of Allied intelligence. Men and women who never fired a weapon were nonetheless shaping the outcome of global conflict. Each decoded radio message represented lives saved, disasters prevented, and ships reaching ports safely. Historians would later call the work of the codebreakers one of the decisive factors in the victory at sea. Yet in 1944, only a handful of people understood this. Captain Gallery and the men of the 22nd Task Group went on with their duties, unaware of how far-reaching their actions had become. Their captured submarine was not just a naval trophy, it was a key to understanding the enemy's mind. Technically, the Enigma taken from U-505 was the Kriegsmarine's latest four-rotor model, a version far more complex than the Army or Air Force variants. Until that point, Allied analysts had struggled to read naval traffic. With U-505's material, the last barrier fell. For the first time, every branch of the German military's encrypted communications was within reach. The information proved vital in the weeks before the Normandy landings. Radio intercepts revealed the positions of German U-boats off the Bay of Biscay, allowing Allied planners to secure the invasion routes. As a result, Operation Overlord proceeded without interference from the German submarine fleet. The seizure of U-505 became an example of how one bold act at sea could alter the course of a global war. There were no parades or headlines, but its effect was profound. In the months that followed, the Allies gained total command of the Atlantic. What had once been a deadly battlefield became a secure highway for victory, while the once feared U-boats retreated to their bases, hunted and outmatched. At the pier in the Bahamas, U-505 lay in silence, a steel witness to the hidden triumphs of the Cold War, proof that in the modern age, knowledge had become the most powerful weapon of all. After the capture of U-505, the U.S. Navy took unprecedented measures to conceal the operation. Within the headquarters of the U.S. and British fleets, it was clear that revealing even the smallest detail could jeopardize the strategic advantage gained at such cost. In official communications, the submarine was reported as destroyed in battle. All documents related to the mission were immediately classified under the highest security level. On the Bahamas, where the submarine had been brought, a restricted and heavily guarded facility was established. Only authorized officers and engineers involved in intelligence projects were allowed access. Every inspection and technical report was conducted under supervision. Photographs, drawings, and written records all bore the stamp "Top Secret." Even within the Navy, few knew that the German boat still existed. The crew of U-505, 59 men in total, were transferred to the United States and placed in an isolated prisoner-of-war camp near Chicago. This facility did not belong to the general POW system and was under direct control of the U.S. Navy. The German sailors were prohibited from any contact with the outside world. Letters and telegrams were forbidden. Officially, they were listed as missing in action, presumed dead. Their families in Germany received notifications that the submarine and her crew had vanished at sea. This deception served a vital purpose. If the Kriegsmarine discovered that the boat had been captured, they would immediately change their encryption systems and communication structures. Therefore, the secret had to be protected at all costs. The existence of U-505 became part of an invisible front, where information itself was the weapon. For months, the captured sailors lived under close surveillance. They were treated according to the conventions of war, but remained completely isolated. American officers conducted periodic interrogations, seeking technical details about German procedures and radio protocols. Yet the main objective was not intelligence extraction, it was maintaining the illusion that U-505 was lost forever. Meanwhile, in the intelligence centers, the material obtained from the submarine continued to bear fruit. Cryptographers at Bletchley Park analyzed intercepted messages, cross-referencing them with the code tables found on U-505. Each decoded transmission helped refine Allied naval strategy. Beneath the surface of secrecy, the real Battle of the Atlantic was being rewritten. By 1945, as the Second World War drew to its close, the story of U-505 remained known only to a handful of officers. In early May, after Germany's surrender, some classified documents were reviewed, but the capture itself was still withheld from public knowledge. The German prisoners, who had spent nearly 2 years in isolation, were finally moved to regular POW camps. Only then did they learn that their submarine had survived and been held on American territory. For the men of the 22nd Task Group, the silence continued even after the war. Captain Daniel Gallery, now back on active service, signed a 10-year confidentiality agreement. His officers and sailors did the same. Many never spoke of the operation, not even in their memoirs. Only a small circle of analysts within the Pentagon and the British Admiralty understood the full scope of what had been achieved. It was not until the early 1950s, when most of the wartime cryptographic systems had become obsolete, that the U.S. Navy decided to partially declassify the operation. Short press releases mentioned that an American task force had once captured a German submarine, but without names, locations, or details. At that time, U-505 still lay moored in the Bahamas, rusting under the tropical sun. Her mechanisms had been removed for study, leaving only the corroding hull. To most naval officers, she was nothing more than an outdated German relic. Few realized that the steel frame before them had once changed the course of the war. The silence surrounding U-505 lasted nearly a decade. While the world rebuilt itself from the ruins of conflict, the heroes of this hidden operation remained unrecognized. Their victory had no medals, no headlines, no parades. It existed only in classified archives, a quiet triumph that proved sometimes silence can echo louder than explosions. By the early 1950s, the world had entered a new era. The Cold War was reshaping military priorities, and the focus of naval power had shifted toward nuclear submarines and jet aircraft. The vessels of the Second World War were disappearing from active service, dismantled, sold for scrap, or sunk as test targets. Among the forgotten relics of the past was the German submarine U-505, lying moored off the coast of the Bahamas. Her steel hull, corroded and encrusted with salt, was slowly decaying in the humid air. Only a few officers who knew her story remembered that this abandoned boat had once played a decisive role in the invisible war of codes. In 1953, Captain Daniel Gallery, by then a retired rear admiral, turned his attention once again to the submarine that had defined his career. He believed U-505 was not merely a captured enemy vessel, but a monument to scientific intelligence and naval determination. Gallery launched a campaign to preserve the submarine as a historical memorial. His proposal was met with skepticism. Many officials considered the idea too costly and impractical. Yet Gallery persisted. He contacted the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, proposing to transfer the submarine there as an educational exhibit. The museum agreed, but the challenge was enormous. U-505 was located more than 2,000 kilometers from Chicago, and her displacement exceeded 700 tons. Moving her would require a complex and expensive logistical operation. Over the next year, engineers developed detailed transport plans, while veterans, private donors, and naval associations raised the necessary funds. What began as one man's idea gradually became a nationwide effort to preserve a piece of history. In 1954, the operation to move the submarine began. First, U-505 was raised with pontoons and stabilized on a special platform. After partial repairs to strengthen the hull, she was transported across the Gulf of Mexico and up the Mississippi River toward Chicago. The voyage lasted several weeks. As the convoy passed riverside towns, thousands of residents gathered to watch the gray submarine gliding slowly along the water. For many, it was a striking reminder of the war that had ended less than a decade earlier. Upon her arrival in Chicago, a new phase began. Engineers and curators restored sections of the hull, sealed the compartments, and recreated the original German markings. Inside, they carefully preserved the machinery and instruments, arranging the compartments so visitors could see the submarine much as it had appeared during wartime. Informational plaques were added to explain the structure and the history of her capture. In 1955, U-505 was officially opened to the public. It was the first time in history that a captured German submarine from the Second World War was displayed on American soil. Thousands of visitors came to see the steel vessel that had once patrolled the Atlantic. Among those attending the opening ceremony was Rear Admiral Gallery himself. For him, it was not only a personal triumph, but the completion of a mission that had begun more than a decade earlier in the waters off West Africa. Over the following decades, U-505 became one of the central exhibits of the Museum of Science and Industry. Veterans, students, and historians came to study its design and the story of its capture. The exhibition told not only of combat and technology, but of discipline, cooperation, and persistence, the qualities that had allowed the impossible to happen. For new generations, U-505 became a tangible lesson on how intelligence and precision could shape history. By the 1980s, the submarine required major restoration. Corrosion and moisture had damaged its hull and internal mechanisms. The museum launched a new preservation campaign supported by corporations, naval veterans, and historical organizations. The restoration took several years. Technicians replaced corroded sections, reinforced structural frames, and restored the original wartime colors. Today, U-505 remains the only German submarine ever captured and preserved on American territory. Beneath the museum's glass canopy, its silhouette stands as a silent witness to the age when the ocean was a battlefield of invisible struggles, when wars were fought not only with weapons, but with radio waves, mathematics, and human intellect. The story once sealed in secrecy had finally found its voice. Through exhibitions and documentaries, the submarine's legacy reached audiences far beyond the museum walls. U-505 ceased to be merely a machine of war. It became a symbol, a reminder that in conflict, silence and knowledge can sometimes prove more powerful than gunfire. The story of U-505 is more than a wartime episode. It is an example of how persistence, intellect, and preparation can alter the course of history. The capture of the German submarine became a symbol of the union between scientific reasoning and military discipline, a victory achieved not through brute force, but through understanding and precision. The events of June 1944 demonstrated that in the age of industrial and technological warfare, success was no longer measured by the number of ships or weapons, but by the speed and accuracy of information. The seizure of U-505 marked the beginning of a new principle in modern conflict, that intelligence could become the deciding weapon. The consequences of the operation extended far beyond the battle itself. Through the documents and devices retrieved from the submarine, the Allies gained direct access to the communications of the Kriegsmarine. This breakthrough hastened the end of the submarine campaign in the Atlantic, reduced merchant shipping losses, and ensured that vital supplies reached Europe at the crucial moment of invasion. The experience also laid the foundation for the development of post-war intelligence systems. In both the United States and Britain, the success of the code-breaking effort inspired the creation of new institutions, the precursors of modern intelligence agencies. The cooperation between military officers, mathematicians, and engineers during the Enigma decryption became a model for future intelligence operations. U-505 served as tangible proof that collaboration between science and the armed forces could produce results of global significance. The moral aspect of this episode was equally important. The actions of Captain Gallery and the men of the 22nd Task Group reminded the world that even in the chaos of war, there is space for reasoned courage and discipline. Their victory was not born of chance, but of a calculated risk, a belief that seizing knowledge could save more lives than destroying an enemy. The submarine that once prowled the Atlantic eventually became a monument to that belief. U-505 stands today as both artifact and lesson, a preserved fragment of a time when technology and human endurance were tested to their limits. Its narrow corridors, heavy machinery, and mechanical complexity tell the story of an era when survival depended on the union of mind and metal. Modern researchers regard the capture of U-505 as one of the first examples of multidisciplinary warfare. Within a single operation, converged tactics, engineering, cryptography, and intelligence. This synthesis defined the future of combined military operations, where victory would depend not on numerical superiority, but on coordination and knowledge. The cultural meaning of U-505 also endures. In the museum halls of Chicago, thousands of visitors each year descend the narrow stairs to step inside the submarine's confined spaces. There, the quiet echoes of history replace the noise of battle. There are no speeches or celebrations, only steel, stillness, and the atmosphere of a vanished world. It is a reminder that behind every technological achievement stand human effort, fear, and responsibility. Over time, the story of U-505 transcended national boundaries. For Americans, it symbolizes the triumph of organized thought and scientific strategy. For Germans, it serves as a reflection on the limits of technological confidence. For historians, it remains a vital source of insight into naval warfare, cryptography, and intelligence cooperation. Today, decades later, the submarine remains perfectly preserved beneath the museum's protective dome. It continues to live not as a weapon, but as a memory of what knowledge can achieve. Its legacy is a message to future generations that strength without understanding is blind, and that information, once gained through courage and discipline, becomes the truest instrument of progress. The story of U-505 is the story of the transition from the age of weapons to the age of information. Its capture was more than a military act. It was a metaphor for the evolution of human warfare itself. In a world now shaped by data and technology, the lesson endures. Knowledge, when pursued with courage and clarity, remains the most enduring form of victory.